Awesome. So just touching on that too, basically, we're talking about kind of this misconception from the clientele. So maybe you could clear that up, but let's back up here. So give us kind of, let's just say a client wanted to choose one of the builds and walk us through the process, beginning to end, but more broadly, and then we can kind of go into more detail about some of what you just brought
Sure.
up is the misconception. So,
Well, we divided it into three distinct parts because, if you try to go too fast or too slow, then you're going to miss a lot of points. So the three parts are really distinct. So we always introduce them to the first part, which is design, engineering, permitting. What are you going to build in your backyard? And then the second part is the fabrication and installation. And the third part is really the finance, because then obviously somebody has to pay for it.
right.
We don't really deal too much with the finance because that's, people usually have their own bank or they're taking another mortgage on their property. If it's an ADU or if it's a developer, they have their own. We do provide some in-house finance. Having said that, the first step is the most important part because you have to first figure out what they want. And we do that as a preliminary. We do what we call project verification. What's the square footage? What are the elevations, etc. Now we have standard models on our website. And I would say those are placeholders because anybody who knows anything about architecture, design, and permitting knows that it's not like the car industry where you can make the Honda Civic and meet the DOT, Department of Transport, and then sell your cars all over the United States. There's just one, maybe a couple of sub-clauses. If you're in California, you need a special converter, catalytic converter. But you can basically turn on the production machine and you're selling those Honda Civics. In the modular business, it's not like that. Like, for instance, the model you have behind us, behind you, is a Napa 600 square foot building. And to give you an example with that one, to the naked eye, that might look like, oh, well, that's one price. And so what is the price off the shelf? Unfortunately, that doesn't really exist. There's a starting price because, as you know, it depends if there's a slope lot, is there a lot of trees? How do we access the property? What type of foundation is needed there? Do people want decks around the unit? Some people change the floor plan. Some people need more glazing, i.e. windows. So even though there is a starting point, we don't carve it in stone. And the reason that is primarily is also because if you build something on a zero lot line, for instance, where you put it all the way to the boundary line of your property, let's say it's a fire lane or a back lane, then usually it's a fire lane too, which means you're not allowed to have windows most likely. So then even if the model has a window in the back, you would have to omit that. That's just one small detail, but those details start adding up really quickly. And so preliminary thing we do when we do what we call project verification. Now, this is where the client already has an expectation. Then once that step is done, well, then you must be able to print a button, hit a button in the factory, and then this thing rolls out of the factory. Well, that's not true because now you have to basically go into permit. What does permit mean? It means that in the state of California, especially, you have to file a full set of drawings. That doesn't mean just a floor plan and elevations. You need to do all your framing, all the electric, any changes you made with the client because they needed specific wants and needs, the fire, the insulation, basically every detail for that building has to be filed. Then because it's made off site, you're not building it there, you're bringing it to the site, the factory has to be verified by a third-party agency because the government doesn't know what you did in your factory. So they license to a third party, a company that comes to your factory. They also want to see a set of drawings that specifically deals to your factory. So that's another step of drawings, right? Then you have the local permit, then you have the engineering, and then typically you need to also do MEP, which is mechanical, electrical, and plumbing, which typically at a site building is done at site, and you don't really have to hire an MEP engineering group. But if you do modular, you do, because when you build something in a factory, the factory needs to know exactly what they're building, and they need to cost everything exactly. And again, it really depends then what you're building. One client will say, well, we need 2 washer dryers in the unit because it's a 2-bedroom and it's 2 individuals and they both want their washer and dryer. Just giving you a crazy example. But then the flow rate on the pipes has to be different. So you're going to have a different diameter pipe that puts in your regular water. Maybe your black water is going to be the same, but your gray water is going to be bigger. I'm just giving a detail that might not always occur. But again, all these details have to be adjusted in the building itself. So that first step, the design, permitting, engineering, and getting that permit so that you can build and the financing can start, is really the first step. And most people have this expectation that that step should take a couple of weeks. But the problem is that many of these disciplines, architecture, engineering, MEP, state third-party approval, they're not typically one company,
Right.
certainly not the government. So if you've worked in the real world, you know that anytime you deal with suppliers, if you send an email saying, well, what is the cost of X? They might not get back to you the next day or even the next day after that. They might actually come back the next week.
Yeah.
That just means you got one piece of the puzzle. So usually if you multiply that, you're looking at least a month just to get the conceptual data and the pricing in place. So there's a lot of misunderstanding from that, and clients get very impatient because they think, well, this should go faster. And then of course, most clients too have this crazy belief that they're the only client. There's about almost 40 million people in California with the new ADU law. There's at least 1 million people are ready to convert to put a ADU on their property. So all the companies are extremely busy. And then there's a supply chain squeeze because of COVID, slowing down supply lines. Production lines were shut down, prices are going up. So that compounds into a longer timeline. And so that's the first step that people need to know about.
Wow. Okay. So we go from that into, I would say, getting the permits and then starting to build. So I know you had mentioned that maybe some clients have this aligned expectation that it could take just a few months to get one onto their backyard, when in reality, the average could be right around 6 months. And again, that's still is not firm, right? It could take longer, depends. There's a lot of variables. So now talk about, I guess,
the state has set a rule that in most counties, they said, well, 90 days, even in the Bay Area, they said 90 days or you get your money back for, because it costs money to get your permit. They've said that it's not true, but the point is that's what the government says.
Yeah.
So they aim for 90 days. So there's already 3 months that they've given themselves to approve it. So imagine 1 million people in the state of California apply for an ADU. Even if you spread it over all the counties in California, most are in the Northern California, i.e. the Bay Area, and Southern California between San Diego, LA, Orange County. Yeah. So you're really looking about those offices being overloaded with demand. So the 3 months, let's hold that as a placeholder. But just to do the drawings and everything on the front end to get to the permit part, you're looking typically at 2 to 3 months too. And that's not because nobody's organized, it's because, and I'll just summarize what you need. You need to, and some people already have all this documentation, so they're the good clients, meaning not that they're nice people or bad people, they just have organized already. So you need a soil sample, right? Because you need to know what are the engineers going to specify for a foundation.
Right.
So you need soils engineers. So if they don't have that, that guy has to come out and do a drill sample. So that's one. That takes easily 2 weeks because you got to schedule him. He's got to come out, pay him, invoice him, all that. Then you need like I said, a structural engineer to do your foundation because the modules weigh a certain amount and earthquake zone, etc. So you need structural engineer. They have to do the drawings. Again, they're busy, so you never get them within 2 weeks. Usually a month. And then, so if you add that all up, and then there's the architect involved, designers, the supplier, us, we need to price out everything because as time changes, prices change. So we have to update the pricing. So like I said, that typically, if you're really motoring and everything is organized, it's 6 weeks. If not, it's 3 months. So that's 3 plus 3, there you're at 6. Yeah. And now you're going to make something. And again, sometimes the permitting, I should put that as a caveat because some counties have pre-approved models. What that really means is that if you're building an identical unit in that in San Jose or in Orange County, whatever, LA County, then just means that you don't have to do all the engineering again. You can just use what you had already, it's on file. And so then the permit should drop in about 10 days typically. So that could squeeze and that could save you almost 2.5 months just there. So there is that should be noted because that might be the case.
Right.
Having said that, most people tend to go towards customizing their unit because the property might need a specific density and they can't go a certain size, etc. So we do a lot of custom work and our modules are not specifically set to be a certain size. We can change it. So that allows us to be flexible. Anyway, so that, and then when the permit drops, let's say if it's not a fast case or a pre-approved case, then you're talking about 3 months, even if it's 2 months. So you're really talking about best case scenario, 2 months design engineering, all this paperwork, and then 2 months, say, for the permit. So that's 4, and then 2 months to make. So there's your 6 months in the best case scenario. During COVID and all this stuff and just the irregularities that are going on, you're looking more like 6 to 8 months. And that's just the reality of it. And again, most people, we find that they, again, think it's like computer programming. You put a bunch of guys to work and it's software. Well, this is hardware. So hardware doesn't kind of operate like that because you're dealing with the real world. So speeding things up is not really a solution. In other words, you can only go as fast as you go. Also, the other thing that most people don't understand is that trucking and supply routes with trucking are a big wild card because you need to hire those companies, and there's no company in modular that owns all their own trucks. It's not cost effective. So you're using third-party truckers. And yeah, so these are the complications in terms of squeezing the timeline. In an ideal world, if it was a giant corporation like an Amazon or something like that, they would have raised enough capital, enough critical mass that they own their own trucks, like Amazon. You know, they deliver with their own delivery system, or like an Uber, where they have everything worked out. The industry is too immature for that yet. It just hasn't happened yet.
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad that you're setting these realistic expectations, and that this kind of law that opens it up, that passed in January of 2020 for California, and then we had something called the pandemic that got in the way. So I think people are just starting to realize this opportunity, but you're right, the infrastructure isn't there jurisdiction-wise for sure. I know of there's a county I can't name right now, but they've reached out to us to help them even plan and set up an ADU, permitting desk with an architect partner of ours as well on pre-approved plans and all that stuff. So this is very, very nascent, new, but still, I think a good opportunity with that.